Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you again for joining us to start the last day of the mission. It's been an incredible few days, dare I say, marvelous. And happily, our imaginations will continue to be enkindled throughout today. I hope you were all able to pick up a program and a handout. If not, there are some by the windows in the front and the back. The handout will be helpful during the talk, and the program is for you to keep and to bring with you when you come back tonight. So today's mission theme is outreach, and we'll be asking the question, what do we become by Christ's light? As beloved sons and daughters of God, how do we love God through loving our neighbor? How do we allow his light to shine through us, to illuminate our surroundings so that others can see? And as a parish, how do we allow Christ's light to shine here as a beacon of healing and hope? Friends, I'm pleased to give you once again, DeLorenzo.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you all again. I want to start today by telling you about my friend Abby, who had a very dramatic conversion experience. Her childhood into her teenage years was really marked by an evangelical upbringing, very deeply schooled in Scripture, the sort of person that regularly went to youth group and to Bible camps in the summer. When they were in their large family van, they would sing all those Bible songs that we sometimes hear now and again on children's shows or on Christian radio. But as she progressed in her teenage years and entered into college, she started to take a hard turn away from all of that. It was in what she read and what she studied and what she thought about. She no longer thought in those ways. She started to think and speak in very different ways. It had to do with her social interactions, and especially in her relationship with boys. As some people may say of a certain generation, to put it politely, she engaged in loose living. This progressed through her 20s into her early 30s even, and if we were to look at it from a distance, you would see just a harder and harder turn away from the childhood upbringing she had. But as we might hope to see, and as we sort of like to see, this hard fall, which was dramatic, also had a dramatic turn. And so in the course of her story, she herself finds herself drawn into the Catholic Church. This is a sort of familiar type narrative for us, isn't it? The fall away, which is dramatic, and then the turn back, which is itself dramatic. And you might wonder, how do I know these things, sort of intimate details about Abby? Well, because she wrote a book about it. She actually let other people know. It's called Into the Deep. Here's the thing that's really sort of noteworthy about her book, though. The book is 190 pages. The turn home, the homecoming, brought back into the church, seeming at the end of this turn away, the return. The homecoming happens on page 72. 190-page book. The homecoming's on page 72. So what's in the rest after page 72? As she has described it, it is the story of learning how to live at home. I think that this drama of the fall and return we're all too familiar with. We almost expect it, right? That's the completion of the story. You start from some place like home. There's a departure and a hard turn away. And if it is to be a full narrative, the completion of the story is going to be the return home. Once you get home, that's it. I mean, think about some of even the childhood stories that we may have encountered. Think of Where the Wild Things Are. Remember this book? What's the story? Child, Max, who's rambunctious and rebellious. He imagines his way away from home and enjoys himself in the frolicking on the island of the wild things. But then he gets hungry and lonely, and he comes home, and when he gets home, supper still warm, waiting for him. End of story. The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. This boy who loves the tree, who comes to the tree to play, but after a while, he starts to get a little bit greedy. He wants things. He takes the tree's apples and he sells them and gets things. He takes the tree's branches and he makes a house out of it. He takes the tree's trunk and he makes a boat out of it. And every time he comes back dissatisfied and wants more and more and more and more until the tree is just a stump. And then at the end of the story, the child, now an old man, sits on the stump. Home. End of story. What about the Lion King? Simba, who turns away from home, feeling the guilt for his father's death, goes and lives in a different kind of loose living, not living in his royal identity, out there with the other creatures eating bugs, until he's called back home, and what does he do? It's a little bit of Hamlet. He fights his uncle, takes back his throne. End of story. Oh, denouement. He has a kid. Now it's the end of the story. That's it. We're familiar with this, aren't we? The fall, the return home, end of story. And to be honest, that seems to be very much the story of the prodigal son, right? Even in our basic understanding of the story from a very early age, here is the one who goes away from home, and then he comes back home, and he's welcomed home, and he's home. End of story. I think I had settled on that as well, because it's the familiar narrative that we know all too well from elsewhere. It's the pattern, it seems, of the fall and return. The prodigal son might be the start of this pattern, and everything else kind of tells that story again and again. And that's why Abby's account of her turn away and return caught my attention, because the majority of the tale is at the end of coming home. What Abby helped me to see is that the end may just be the beginning for the prodigal son. That's where I want to spend our time today. How is that end just the beginning for the prodigal son? Well, let's talk about this guy, shall we? This prodigal son, this younger son. In the program handout for today, on the inside, you have 3 parables. The parable of the lost son, and it's already suggestive of something else, the lost sons, is there in the bottom portion. Let's just kind of get the description, the basic description from the beginning of this younger son. What is he about? What's the first thing that he does? He demands his inheritance from his father. Give me the share of the estate that I have coming to me. Now let's make sure we grasp this. When do you get your inheritance? When your father dies. When he demands his inheritance, what is he functionally saying? Time for you to die. Give me what's mine. He demands it. Does he have any desire to use that estate there at home? Absolutely not. He packs everything onto his back. And if you remember that children's book, The Giving Tree, you might remember some of those images of the young boy with all the branches loaded onto his back. That's not a bad image of the younger son leaving his father's estate with his share of the inheritance, which, by the way, he wasn't entitled to anyway. It would go to his elder brother, but his father cut it in half and gave him half. So there he is at the gate of his father's property, looking out. His father behind him, his father's house behind him, everything on his back, and what's ahead of him? Really, a world without his father. He's seeking to go out there and make a name for himself. It's actually what it says of these guys that built the Tower of Babel, by the way. They wanted to make a name for themselves, which I just taught my undergrads 45 minutes ago before I came here. So here is the younger son with those desires, the desires to take what he believes should be his, to go out away from his father, to construct something without his father, to build a life for himself. Well, we know what happens to him, don't we? He goes out there and he loses it all in loose living, as it says in Scripture, in a life of dissipation where everything is drained away from him, pulled apart. What was collected is now dismembered, taken apart. And it says that in his desperation, he basically allies himself, unites himself to a citizen of a far country. The far country in biblical speak is always Babylon. It's always the opposite of God's house. The far country is way out there. It's where you don't want to be. And he unites himself to a citizen of that place, looking for anything. He finds himself, as we know, right, in the pig pen, tending to the swine, wishing that he could just have his fill of what the pigs eat. This is desperation. This is emptiness. On the cover of this little program from today, we have this painting of the Return of the Prodigal Son by Rembrandt. And Rembrandt here captures for us the condition of the younger son, obviously the one kneeling. Tell me, if you will, what kind of things do we see in the depiction of this son that tells us or shows us of his condition of having lost everything? What do you see? Sharon. He's barefoot. Let's look down at his feet. His left foot, the shoe has been completely obliterated. His feet are now bared to the hard road that he's walked. The other shoe, ripped in tatters. This tells us something of the journey, doesn't it? He's lost all the cushioning, all the support. He has felt the pain of that journey. Good. What else do we see about the condition of the younger son? Please. His clothes are torn. What kind of clothes is he even wearing? Undergarments, right? Like rags. Excellent, right? Dirty, loose fitting, disheveled. You see it in his clothing. What else? No hair. Where's his hair? Who has their head shaved immediately when it's done to them? Prisoners, don't they? Ought to have their head shaved when they're enrolled in the prison. This would have been well after Rembrandt's time, when people were sent to concentration camps. First thing, head shaved, number put on. The image of a prisoner here, one who's lost his dignity, freedom. Good. Rembrandt showing us what this condition looks like. We also see in the posture of his body, just the exhaustion, right? Falling to his knees, unable to hold himself up. He depicts it for us in the posture of the younger son. Now, it's a little bit difficult to see. You got to get the light just right, because a lot of this painting is intentionally done in the dark, and the light is supposed to just show up things a little bit here and there. But on or to the younger son's person, in part of his description, as you look at it, what just doesn't make sense? If he's lost everything, if he's in a condition of depravity, of desperation, do you see anything that just wouldn't fit? Okay, he's humbling himself, perhaps. Maybe he's exhausted, maybe he's humbling. Sure, so the welcome doesn't seem fit to what's happened, sure. Oh, where was that voice? He's in the light. Is this his brother over the side? We're going to get to him. It's hard to see this. Look very closely around his waist to the right side, hanging on his hip. A sword, a knife, a sword. Think about this. This guy he's sold everything. He's lost everything. And here he is, kneeling before his father, having lost everything, with a sword hanging from his belt. Do you remember the part of the parable where it mentions his sword? Me neither. It ain't there. What is Rembrandt doing? What is the sword? Well, to somebody from a royal house, the sword is the sign of their nobility. Who gives you the sword? Your father. What is Rembrandt doing here? It's not something that's there in the text of the parable. It actually represents something else that's in the text of the parable. When he's all the way out there, the younger son, and he knows that he's hit rock bottom, he's lost everything, what's the one thing that he can't get rid of that he still knows and remembers? Even here, at the farthest distance, I am my father's son. Because what does he say? I will arise and go to whom? My father. And when he comes home, what does his father say? My son has returned. Rembrandt, it seems, has captured that thing that we probably would pass over otherwise. When this younger son has given away everything, the one thing he can't give away is his identity as his father's son. It's who he is, even though he set out on that road to live in a world without his father, even though he has wished his father dead. His father is dead to him, he thinks. This is a bit of the sort of mystery of what's going on in the parable that we might not notice. He's lost everything, and we pass over those words. Of course he calls him my father. Of course? Really? Here's the one thing he can't get rid of, even if he wanted to. And then as his narrative concludes, let's see what it says. So this is right before the paragraph break on the right-hand page. The father says, of course, bring the finest robe and put it on him, put a ring on his finger and the sandals on his feet, take the fattened calf and slaughter it. Then let us celebrate with a feast, because this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. Then the celebration began. Break. The end of the mention of the younger son. And here's where Abby, my friend, taught me to apply my imagination. Jesus ends the part of the parable of the younger son right there. But Abby taught me to think, perhaps Jesus is leading us here to imagine. What would it mean for that younger son to live at home as the son, to enjoy the celebration and what comes after? Because remember, he started in this household, and he did not love it. He was a son who lived as though he were not a son. The celebration begins. He is the son. What would it mean for him to change, to live as if he were the son? That is proposed to us. It's proposed to Jesus' listeners. Imagine. Now think. What would have to change? We know how he was at the beginning. What would become of him later? It's not enough to return home. The end of this is going to be, what does it mean to truly be at home? We're going to come back to that. That ends the parable, right? It doesn't end the parable, but that's what we remember. Most people remember. There's a break. The last 35 to 40% of this thing has to do not with the younger son directly, but with whom? The elder son. And the parable is called, typically, the parable of the prodigal son. In other words, who do we recognize as the prodigal son? The younger son. Even the darn parable's named after him. And now we're gonna get a little bit of an understanding of the elder son. Parable of the prodigal son. Hello, 35 to 40% has to do with me, the elder son. What's this guy's business? Well, let's look first back at the painting. Where is the elder son? Clearly there off to our right. How do we know he is the son? He is dressed in the attire of his father, right? The robe that's around his father in the middle is also around the elder son to the side. How would you describe him? What do you see in him, how he's depicted? Yes? Excellent. He's looking down. His gaze is condescending. Okay, so he's above, looking down below. What else do we notice about this, Andrea? Yeah, if you look down there at the ground, it seems that it's like on a little bit of a terrace that he's standing. Where his brother is, seems to be something recessed in the floor. Was there a hand up back there? Yeah. He looks angry. Maybe you can see this in his face. In this way, it's kind of left to your interpretation. What do you read in his face? Certainly, the gaze is pointing downwards. Certainly, it seems to not be moved. It's still. How about his posture? Oh, go ahead. His hands are what? Closed. And you're going to see that in contrast to whose hands? Father's, which are open. So his hands are closed. Excellent. Yes? He's in the shadows and distant. Love that description. He's on the periphery of the light, isn't he? Not in the, where's the light? Centered on that embrace. We'll get to that later. He's on the periphery of it, looking at it, but not in it. His posture? Erect. You see that, see the cane that he's holding? Stiff. It's paralleling, mirroring his posture, upright and erect. Hi. It's nice to see you. Welcome. So here is the description of the elder son that Rembrandt has seen from the parable. What's the elder son's issue that we get at the end? First of all, where is he geographically? He's where? He's in the field. He's just around his father's house. Would you like to go here? May I help you? Okay. He's in the field on the estate, just outside the house, right? What is he doing? He's doing the work, his father's work. How long has he done it? He's always done it. What does he hear? The sound of celebration inside. He asks the servant, what's going on? Your brother has returned. Your father is throwing him a feast. And what's the elder brother's issue? Angry. Jealousy. That, SOB, I mean, this is probably the language in Hebrew. Know what it would be? And he will not do what? Go inside. He's outside. He will not go inside. What does his father do? His father comes out of the house and goes to him. Now, this is the second time that the father actually moves outward. The first time is with his sight. We get the image of the father as he's standing as if it were on the porch, gazing at the distant horizon, waiting for his son. And it says, while his son was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and loved him. He saw him at the farthest distance, as if just when his son turned around, the father's gaze was upon him. There's the movement of the father, 1. Here's the movement of the father, 2. To go to his bitter, jealous, angry son. He goes to him, the second movement of the father. The son, the elder son, has been at home, but now he won't go in the house because the younger son is in the house. What does the elder son want? The younger son out or punished. The elder son, who has remained in his father's house, wants his father's house to be ruled according to his own terms. Wait, whose house is this? Father's house, but the elder son wants to write the rules. We get the elder son who's bitter, who's angry, who lacks compassion, who is, as Rembrandt has shown us, near the light, but outside it, looking from the outside in a condescending way, stiff and erect, unbending, inflexible. Nice guy. So what would it mean for the elder son to come inside? I asked you before, what would it mean for the younger son to really be at home? Well, what would it mean for the elder son to come inside? I don't know, can you identify with either of these young people? The younger son who's been wayward, must come home, but to be home means to change. The elder son who's bitter because somebody else has received compassion, mercy, more than was due to them. Can you relate to both? I don't know. Who's this parable really about, anyway? Well, why don't we take a look? We actually don't have to guess. Do you see at the very top here, the parts of Scripture that we tend to just kind of pass over so we can get to the action? Titled it here, The Setup. Here's the setup of not just this parable, but the two that come before it. It begins like this. The tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to Jesus to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So to them he addressed a parable. We have 4 different types of people in 2 groups. The tax collectors and sinners are doing what? Willfully drawing near to Jesus to hear him. Now, here's an important thing we need to recognize. This is the Gospel of Luke. The Gospel of Luke, the definition of a disciple, is the one who hears the word of God and acts on it. The tax collectors and sinners are hearing, so we're on our way. Tax collectors and sinners draw near to hear. Then you have the scribes and Pharisees, the experts of the law, the religiously observant, the keeper of rules. What are they doing? They're within earshot, but they're murmuring. Murmuring, never a good thing in Scripture. Ever, ever, ever. They're murmuring, complaining, bickering. Another word that starts with B. That's what they're doing. So, it says, to them he addressed this parable. To whom? Who's them? All of them. And in fact, it's not one parable, it's 3. How did these go? First parable, the parable of the lost sheep. There are 99 sheep. This one pretty little sheep goes and gets itself lost by its own power and choice. Wanders off helplessly, off the pasture, cannot get itself back. What does the shepherd do? Leaves the 99 to go get the one lost sheep. and oftentimes we see this in art, carries the sheep back on his shoulders. The way that the sheep walked out, which likely hurt its feet, it's not required to walk back. The shepherd carries. Now, who do you think knows very well what it's like to get yourself good and lost into situations you can't get yourself out of, when you've lost yourself, when you feel hopeless? Sinners. That's the definition of a sinner, to get yourself lost. Oh, but what does the shepherd do? He brings the sheep back to the sheepfold and does what? Calls the friends and neighbors. In other words, the ones who are close to home. Calls them and says what? Rejoice with me, for the one that was lost has been found. In the setup of this parable, you have the sinners who know themselves to be lost. Who's always close at hand? Who's always close to being right, but not quite? Scribes and Pharisees. The friends and neighbors. You ought to rejoice. Okay, let's try this again. How about there's a woman who has these 10 coins. The coins are all valuable, and she loses one. And she searches for this coin with incredible intensity and passion, throwing over all the furniture in her house to find this one coin, and when she finds it, rejoices. You know who knows a little something about what it's like to search after every last bit of money as if the whole world depended on it? Tax collectors. They know that passion. That would speak to them, wouldn't it? This is the kind of passion with which this woman has searched for this one lost coin. And what does she do when she finds it? She calls her friends and neighbors and says, "Come and rejoice with me, for what has been lost has been found." Who's always close at hand? So close. Scribes and Pharisees. Rejoice. Okay, let's try this again. Now it's not a sheep. Now it's not coins. Now it's not friends and neighbors. There were two sons. One son goes and gets himself lost by his own choice and his own reckless decisions, by his own hatred of his father's house, by his own demand for his inheritance, and loses it all in the distant country. And the father stands on the porch and looks with incredible passion and intensity to find that child. Who knows that? Sinners. And who knows that passion? Tax collectors. Now to the scribes and Pharisees. You are not just friends and neighbors. You are sons. The one who's lost has been found. You're so close to home. What do you have to do? Learn how to rejoice for your brother. The scribes and Pharisees, we like to push them off to a distance as if they're the arch enemies here. They're always so close. They're almost right, which is what makes the wrongness so apparent. They get it all right, except they will not accept the ones who have been lost when they're returned. Jesus tells this parable. He tells it to these addressees. What does he say by the end in his masterpiece, the parable of the lost sons? You're all being claimed, but you all have to learn how to be at home. And who is Jesus, by the way? Is he not the Father's sight, the Father's movement to the distant horizon to find the lost ones? Is he not the only beloved Son who's always been at home, but who makes room for the sinners? He speaks to the sinners and tax collectors, scribes and Pharisees, but he also does what he asks them to do. Come home, be at home. Come inside, welcome the others. You know what? Who is this parable really about? Now, the addressees are the scribes and Pharisees, the sinners and tax collectors, but who is it really about? We happen to pass over this. It's right in the first line of the third parable. A man had two sons. Who's the subject of the narrative? The man, the father. The two sons come as the extension of his narrative. A man had two sons. We focus on one son, maybe we focus on the other son, but the center of the parable is actually the man, the father. Let's look at the father. I've said a little bit about what the father does. He goes to the distant horizon in his compassionate vision. He goes out and pleads with the elder son. What do you see here from the father? I'm sorry? Love. How do you see it? He's embracing the younger son. We'll get to that. Excellent. Yes? Okay. Let's describe it, though. How is it depicted? Yeah, this is what we see, but what has Rembrandt painted? How do you see the father here? Well, he's aged. Yeah, go ahead. Over him. I like that. Yeah. This is an old man, isn't it? Weathered. He's been through the seasons. But he still is dignified, covered in that cloak, same as the elder son. And yet his posture has now hunched over. And as he does that, what's happening in the middle? Close to his heart. He's creating space. Look at his eyes, mostly closed. This is something we might know about Rembrandt. Rembrandt had a fascination with the blind. Those who have spent years searching for something and it has worn out their eyesight. He was very interested in Tobit, for example. Here, he has painted this father as blind or nearly blind. What do we hear in the parable? The father who searched the distant horizon for his endlessly lost son. The strain on that vision. Look at his hands. This takes some time to notice, but the hands are actually not identical. The left hand, on our right side, the left hand appears stronger, as if it were masculine, and it's pulling the son close with strength. His right hand, that's on our left side, you see how it's smoother? This is the Neutrogena hand. It's tender, isn't it? And comforting down the bottom, towards the bottom of the back. The strength and the tenderness in the two hands. But I think the key here, and this was the first thing you were saying, has to do with the space in his body. Rembrandt is painting this to say, where is home? Where is the home? Here is the home. The son is being brought in to the space his father makes for him, in his own body, by his own waiting and by his desire. What would it mean for that younger son to truly be at home in his father's house? I'll tell you. It would mean for him to become like his father. Not to just come home, but to learn how to be the one who makes a home for others. Not just to be the one who comes home, but the one who makes a home for others. This younger son, to really be at home, must learn his father's ways, to learn how to give rather than take. What about the elder son who's there on the periphery just looking at the light? What would it mean for him to walk into that household, his father's household? It would mean to be at home with his younger brother. That would mean to let go of the bitterness and learn how to forgive. The end of both of their narratives leaves this open, but it's the beginning of what they're to become. The younger son must learn how to give rather than take, to become like his father. The elder son must learn how to forgive rather than be bitter, to forgive like his father. This brings the challenge of the entire parable, I think, to us in a new way. Many of us at many times, and some of us perhaps right now, feel distant from home, are searching for that compassion, to be drawn close. And God, who seeks us, will make space to bring us home. But it's also a challenge. To be home, we must learn to love that home, which means we have to continually learn how to make space for others. And I know this only too well as an elder son, the one who did everything right all the time, what it's like to know that the younger child is always loved more without doing anything to earn it, right? The younger one, how is this possible? You see all these A's that I got? He just crashed my car, literally. To make a space, not just in the home, but in your heart, to forgive and welcome the younger one. Sometimes it's in a family, sometimes it's in the workplace, sometimes it's in the community, sometimes it's in the parish, to welcome the one who very obviously hasn't deserved it. None of us did. Look, Abby told this narrative of the dramatic turn away and the dramatic turn back. And then she slowed the whole thing down, and I was frustrated by it at first. You gotta learn what it's like to live at home. This is boring. It is boring sometimes. I have a dramatic conversion story that ended literally at the bottom of a waterfall on the top of a mountain in the Italian Riviera. For a long time, I thought that was the story where I was healed and forgiven and strengthened. But you know what? That's the beginning of the story. Because the real gift and the real challenge is to learn to become one who heals, who forgives, and who strengthens others. Let's leave it here for today with the invitation and the opportunity to return to this parable time and again, and perhaps with the aid of this painting or other works of art to show it to us. Thanks, everybody.
Lenny, thank you so much. So I'm very delighted to invite you all to enjoy lunch sponsored by our fabulous St. Vincent de Paul Society chapter here at St. Anthony. There's tables set up in the church meeting room and also outside for those of you who'd like to enjoy the fresh air. Thanks so much, and we'll hope to see you tonight.